Wonder if it had anything to do with, like, well, I don't think it was the BBC, if even if they had the BBC, but thinking about the Doctor Who coming back, and then they are all experiencing everything with time travel, whether it was forward or backward or anything, and it was starting to gain its momentum, its love. So
Yeah.
I've always been curious that maybe because it was dealing with that time travel thing that Dark Shadows had, that maybe it was doing it so much better in some aspects to where it was have a different storyline because it wasn't with one person, it was more going to different times.
Yeah.
So,
Right. Yes. Yeah. Dark Shadows, because it was a daytime show shot on videotape inside a TV studio,
mhm.
was more limited than what nighttime shows like The Time Tunnel, Star Trek, Doctor Who could do. So yes, other shows perhaps, and Night Gallery came along, and
Hmm.
so other shows perhaps eclipsed Dark Shadows. But well,
Yeah.
there are so many ABC shows in particular that go up like a rocket and then come down.
Oh
Yeah,
Batman,
yeah.
Twin Peaks, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. I mean, you
that's
can think of,
true.
and many of them happen to be on ABC for some reason. They would be
That's
huge
odd.
hits, but then suddenly drop off.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's really interesting to really think about. One thing that you added is toward the end of the book. I think it was in the last chapter before the afterword. You had mentioned that Dan Curtis wanted to do a show of the called Classic Horror Theater, and he was gonna like basically kind of do some of the stories that he had already done, like Dracula, Dorian Gray, things like that. But then also, you mentioned that he wanted to do episodes with Fall of the House of Usher from Poe and Ligeia. And so that just made me like, oh, I wish that would have happened. That would have been amazing. Do you know, like, what was the reason at that point in time he wasn't able to fulfill that?
Well, I'm not sure. Budget reasons, maybe, or
Okay.
network decisions, or he just couldn't sell it to
Yeah.
anybody. Um, many scripts were written but never produced. Uh, but those particular classic horror theater or whatever it was going to be were not written, but he did plan to do that, and wanted to do some of the modern contemporary Gothic
Mhm.
adaptations, like of Mary Stuart, the Crystal Cave or something like that. But it just never materialized. But then
Okay.
he hit big when he produced The Night Stalker, and then ABC
Absolutely.
asked
Mhm.
for a second movie, which he directed. Richard Matheson wrote both of those, but then Curtis and Matheson were not involved in the TV show Kolchak the Night Stalker, which ran for just 20 episodes. Uh,
Mhm.
Curtis, perhaps short-sightedly, said, I didn't think it could be done. He
Mhm.
said, I didn't think that a monster of the week could sustain itself. But of course, now we have seen the X Files and Supernatural and many other things that do go on for years with many different monsters. So maybe he sold himself short there.
Yeah.
Uh, but in 2005, when ABC tried to revive The Night Stalker with Stuart Townsend, Dan
Mhm.
Curtis was a consultant
Okay.
on that show, but he was not involved with the Darren McGavin show.
Okay.
Hmm.
Interesting. One other thing I was going to ask, and this is about the show Dark Shadows. Just, and this is kind of, I guess, the English teacher in me, the analyzing things. Green is used everywhere, in the draperies, in the clothing. Some of the candles a lot of times were that kind of aqua blue. And what I really thought was really cool when I watched Tomb of Ligeia yesterday, they also used those aqua kind of blue candles as well. But anyway, but going back to, did he have a purpose of using the green color?
Well, green sometimes is considered a witch's color. I think that the Bell Witch ties in with that, but I think also it was just to capitalize on color TV.
Mm-hmm.
In the late 60s, many shows, Batman, even Gunsmoke and Bonanza,
Mm-hmm.
were very colorful, which I liked. I wish TV shows were more colorful like that today, but I think it
Yes.
was to capitalize on color TV. So they used the blue candles and the green, Julia wore a green
Mm-hmm.
suit and Cassandra wore green dresses. I think it just looked good on TV. And if you've noticed that multicolored Afghan that bounces around through
Yes.
all of the different sets and time periods.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
so I don't know, but then green too, can be can have the connotation of sickness, a sick
Right.
green,
Mm-hmm.
or uneasiness, or
Or envy and things
yes,
like that.
right.
Yes.
So probably it was just a more pragmatic decision to really put color onto the show, but
Mm-hmm.
yes, green is definitely well. You'll meet. I know you're watching right now in the 1795 story.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty soon you'll meet a character named Adam who constantly wears a green turtleneck sweater.
Oh,
So
nice. Okay.
so you see green throughout the show. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, I thought it was really neat. I just started picking up those elements. And one of the things it just reminded me of is in many Hitchcock productions, green is also used several times in, especially like in Rear Window with Grace Kelly's suit. She has a green suit. In The Birds, Tippi Hedren with a green suit. And in Vertigo, there's a lot of green as well. And so I just kind of put those things together. And I was just like, this is really a neat thing. But I think that makes total sense, having that as a prominent color for color TV, especially with them doing part of it in black and white going into color. And so that it took me a minute to actually kind of, I love black and white movies and shows. But when I started, watching it, it was in black and white. And then when it jumped to color, it took me a minute because I'm like, I was really enjoying this in black and white, but then now I've loved the color.
Oh yeah, I do too. I love seeing all of the costumes and the sets and the
Mm-hmm.
candles and everything in
Yeah.
color. Dark Shadows was the first ABC soap opera to go to color, even before General Hospital.
Oh,
Uh,
I did not know that. That's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah, August of 1967,
Okay.
near the end of the Barnabas Maggie story.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
and But then I'm sure you've noticed that throughout the run, every once in a while, you'll see a black and white episode, but it was not black and
Yes.
white. Yeah, it was not black and white on the TV back then. Those are
Okay.
black and white kinescopes, meaning
Oh,
that the color tape was lost.
okay.
It's a miracle that all but one of the 1,225 episodes still exists, because back then,
Wow.
very few soap operas episodes exist except for special episodes like weddings or something
Mm-hmm.
before the mid to late 70s, because
Mm-hmm.
back then the networks, even with the Tonight Show and other shows like that, but certainly game shows and soap operas, they would erase them and use the videotapes over and over again,
Wow.
because they didn't think that these shows would ever be seen again, or that anyone would want to see them again. But luckily, Dan Curtis, who got his start as a salesman for TV syndication, kept all of the episodes, because I guess he was far-sighted enough to realize, well, maybe someday they can be rerun somewhere. So all but one of the episodes still exist. And that one episode, luckily, a fan who was blind tape recorded every day's episode, and she still happened to have the tape when
Wow.
Jim Pearson and MPI Home Video were putting together the
Mhm.
episodes and found out that one tape was missing. Luckily, she had that in her collection, and so when you get to that very late in the show on the DVDs, you hear the tape running, and then MPI Home Video has put still pictures from episodes before and after it together.
Okay.
So, and done very well. You almost don't notice the fact that it's just still pictures, but luckily all of the episodes exist. But back then, some of the color tapes were lost, but luckily there was something called kinescopes, meaning pointing a camera at the screen and making a film of
Okay.
the show to send to stations that were showing Dark Shadows maybe a day or a week late,
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
sending them to the West Coast, because the shows came on later. I mean, after the time when we saw them on the East Coast. So
Mhm.
luckily, MPI was able to dig up all of those kinescopes, which are on film. Dark Shadows is on videotape, but
Mhm.
the kinescopes are filmed. So that's why some of them look kind of fuzzy, or the sound is a little fuzzy, but that's the best we have. But thank goodness we have that.
Yes. Oh, I know that. I did wonder about that, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because that's just amazing that, like you said, everything still exists because of that. Dan Curtis was very smart. Definitely.
He had a he had a vision of a future that I think was a little too, futuristic. This may be
Mhm.
one of the reasons why Dark Shadows kind of was like a novelty, I guess, during the time frame when it was on, prime time, not prime time, daytime
Mhm.
television.
Mhm.
And the whole idea with the, genre of the vampire, and seeing the vampire as kind of a human and how he became a vampire, I think that really was what sold him the most to the network.
Yeah.
In my opinion, I mean, because if you think about it, all the other big name shows that were going on were mostly kind of first responder. You had the Perry Masons, you had the Dragnet, you had Ambulance of Emergency, you had Adam 12. So I think the atmosphere of the society of that time kind of dictated what was acceptable, what was not. Because I think now, I don't even think if anybody tried to put on a gothic soap opera now, it would even reach day one, in my opinion, because it's so inundated in prime time with, well, thank goodness they finally stopped Supernatural. That should have stepped it way back when, but okay. Uh, that's me just being mad at the writers and the network because they ruined it
Yeah.
after season 2, in my opinion. But so yeah, I think Dark Shadows is a unsung hero of the day, in my opinion. So,
Yes, I agree. I think another reason why the show sort of burned out fast is that it moved much faster than other soap operas.
mhm.
Every day ended with a shock or a cliffhanger, like you would get only on a Friday episode of As the World Turns,
Mhm.
or General Hospital, or Days of Our Lives. So the show moved a lot faster, and therefore the writers ate up more story faster than they would have if they had strung it out over 6 months instead of 3 months or 6 weeks.
Mhm.
And also that meant you had to watch it every single day to know what was going on, especially when they went into the past and went into parallel time and changed
Mhm.
history and all of that. You really had to watch and study, which we fans did, of course, but the everyday viewer, I think, statistics said that most people see, no, not most, some people see soap operas maybe only 2.5 or 3 times per week. I
Mhm.
don't. I watch 3 of the remaining 4 soap operas, and I watch every single day, of course. But other people are not that loyal, and if you just dip in and out of Dark Shadows, you would be totally confused, and
I think so
you would
too.
not enjoy it. And so I think that led to the loss of viewers, because you just had to really devote your time and day to it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree totally. Yeah, because as a teen, my friend would watch Days of Our Lives, and I was watching As World Turns because I came on at the same time. And I remember one summer she got me hooked on Days of Our Lives, and then I'd have to ask my mother what's going on in As the World Turns, and she's like, "You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have gone over to that one." And so, and then I went back and forth, for several years after that with both of them. But you could jump in easier and catch up with a couple of episodes. But yeah, with Dark Shadows, if I stopped watching it, I would have to rewatch probably, I don't know, probably 20 episodes to get recaught back up, if I was going to get back into it. So I'm continuing on my journey.
Mhm. Oh yes, it's wonderful. I have, since 2010, I have watched the show all the way through 3 times.
Oh, wow.
Usually just one every day. Weekends
Okay.
too. Sometimes I would watch 2, but but that's how it's intended. Like newspaper comic strips and soap operas, you're supposed to see just that bit of it every
Snippets.
single
Yeah.
day, and then
Hmm.
you wait until the next day to see more. And the anticipation was
Yes.
part of the thrill of the show, and even worrying about the characters. Later in the show, one of my favorite characters becomes locked in a dungeon, and no one knows where she is, and I worried about that all weekend long until I could see the Monday episode.
Oh, that's so neat. That is so neat. One other thing that G and I were talking about with you being an English professor, and I know you showed some of the episodes while you were teaching, and things like that. Uh, did you get a chance to teach Poe very often with the English that you did teach?
Yes, most of my English classes at TSU were developmental English and then college freshman English,
Hmm.
which I liked. Some teachers don't like to teach the freshman English; they'd rather be teaching, their specialty or something
Hmm.
upper division. But I liked teaching freshman English, because if the students can't get beyond that, they'll never get up to the upper division classes. So
Absolutely.
I enjoyed giving them that extra help in writing, grammar, sentences, paragraphs, essays. But
Hmm.
I infused a lot of popular culture into the classes. We watched movies every semester. The students and I watched Somewhere in Time, one
Oh,
of Richard
nice.
Matheson's great movies.
Yeah, I
And
love that.
um, and whenever I did teach early American literature, one of the 2 movies was, we showed 2 movies every semester, was House of Usher, Roger
Hmm.
Corman's movie, uh,
Hmm.
written by Matheson. And the other one I showed was The Last of the Mohicans, Daniel Day-Lewis. But yes, in early American lit, when I taught that, and then when I taught honors world literature for the TSU Honors College, I would bring in Poe, and a couple of different textbooks had The Cask of Amontillado and The Pit and the Pendulum.
Hmm.
And then often I would read aloud The Telltale Heart. I liked to read stories and poems to my students. And I got that idea from Jonathan Frid, who later in life did a reader's theater type of dramatic readings show, a one-man show, where he would read great stories and poems, and he read The Cask of Amontillado and especially The Telltale Heart. But then we also studied Annabel Lee, which is a great poem, one of my favorites, and it's good and short so that we can really
Hmm.
concentrate on it and do a close reading. And we talked about how of course, so many of Poe's narrators are unreliable narrators, the Telltale
Yes.
Heart and Ligeia and others, when we have no proof that any of this is happening. And sadly, I wonder whether the narrator of Annabel Lee is unreliable. I would like, the romantic in me would like to believe that, yes, she loved him as much as he loved her, and they were happy together. But all we have is his word. And even at one point in the poem, he says, yes, as if he's trying to convince himself, yes, that must be the way it was.
Yes.
So, but I think that's a great poem. But as I told my students, I call it horribly romantic, because it is
Yes.
romantic with with a small R, meaning a love story, and romantic with a capital R, because of the great outpouring of extreme feelings and love for the past and everything like that. But it's also horror, especially the way it ends. I'm lying
Absolutely.
by her side in the sepulcher by the sounding sea. So
Mhm.
so yeah, that's a great one that you can read on many levels. So yes, we did cover some of his poems, The Raven, and the some of the short stories, and then I also would always show all or some of Vincent Price's 52-minute film, An Evening of Edgar Allan Poe,
Yes, that is
in which
fantastic.
yeah,
Yes.
he does a one-man show of The
Mhm.
Telltale Heart and The Pit and the Pendulum and a couple of others, The Sphinx, and
Yes. I can't think of the other one that he
I can't
does in
either
it,
at the
but
moment.
oh, it is fantastic. Yeah,
Yes.
it's a great show.
And if you can ever find Jonathan Frid's Telltale Heart, it was on a VHS compilation tape. I'm not
Hmm.
sure whether it made it to DVD, but in the mid 80s, the New Jersey Network, a group of PBS stations in New Jersey,
Hmm.
started showing Dark Shadows, and it became wildly popular up in the New York, New Jersey area. And
Hmm.
so Jonathan Frid, who lived in New York at the time, would appear on the fundraisers like you see Nashville's Channel 8 doing, where they ask for money. And so they would have special programs, and Jonathan would do some of his dramatic readings, and did a great version of The Telltale Heart on one of them. So yes, Frid himself, of course, loved Poe and Shakespeare. He was a Shakespearean actor. He had played Lord Capulet and Caliban, but his favorite role was Richard III. He
Okay.
he
Oh, I
he.
bet he was amazing.
Yes, and you can see some of that Shakespearean approach in his Barnabas, and
Yes.
and he said that he didn't try to play it like a monster or a horror or accentuate the bite or anything. He said
Yeah.
he played the part like an alcoholic. He said like someone with a sickness and an addiction, and he's compelled to do the things he does, but then he's sorry about it later. And then and Jonathan also said something very interesting. He said, I think the scariest monster is a liar, someone who tells a lie and then has to keep the lie going and tell more and more lies, and he becomes frantic and desperate. And you see that in him, and it affects everyone around him. So he was playing an alcoholic and a liar more than he was playing a vampire. He didn't really like to do the big bite,
Yeah.
although that's what was so exciting to the audience.
Absolutely. That's an interesting way to play it, but it makes total sense. It really does. That's really neat. Well, did I know with yeah, I told you I teach freshman English in high school, and my students all love Poe. Very few of them are like, "Ooh, why are we having to read Poe?" They all love him. And in our curriculum, Annabelle Lee, we do in a star-crossed love unit compared to Romeo and Juliet. And so I have them compare who is the most star-crossed. And so it's very interesting to hear their points of views about that. So did your students love Poe? Did some like reject him? Because with being older, they're adults.
Well,
What
I
did you
think
find?
most of them either loved or liked or felt neutral. I don't
Mhm,
think any of them hated Poe because,
mhm,
luckily, because of his subject matters of love and passion and
mhm.
revenge and horror. All of that is still going on today, and so students react to that. So yeah, I think that they enjoyed. They always enjoyed listening to me read The Telltale Heart, and
Oh, I
they
bet.
liked Annabelle Lee and some of the movies we saw. So yes, I think they enjoyed that.
Oh, very awesome. Yeah, I love it.
Uh,
Jeannie?
another
Oh,
another
yeah, go ahead.
movie
Go ahead.
another movie I often showed was Wuthering Heights, the 1970 version with Timothy Dalton and Anna Calder Marshall, with that
I have not seen that version. I'll have to
it,
check that
oh
out.
yeah, and exquisite music by Michel Legrand. That's another one, like Somewhere in Time, and what we
Hmm.
talked about, where the music really becomes part of it.
Okay.
It's only the first half of the book, and the ending is changed from the novel. But
Hmm.
other than that, it's a fantastic adaptation. Oh, and we watched The Outsiders and Chinatown and A Patch of Blue, Sidney Poitier, Shogun, Richard Chamberlain,
Hmm.
and Les Miserables. I think the best version of that is the 1978 TV movie version with Richard Jordan of Logan's Run as Jean
Oh,
Valjean and
okay.
Anthony Perkins of Psycho as Javert.
Oh,
Anthony Perkins was
nice.
born to play Javert as much as he was born to play Norman Bates. That's
Very
a great
interesting.
production.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then with the students, I would use many other short stories, poems, newspaper clippings, paintings. I would bring in paintings, and the students would write their impressions and their feelings about paintings. And so, yeah, because my interest and expertise is popular culture, I used a lot of that with the students, and then would show segments from Dan Curtis's trilogies, Trilogy of
Hmm.
Terror or Dead of Night, and
Hmm.
some of his other works. And the students always enjoyed those. So yeah, I would get Dan Curtis into the act as well, you know.
Jeannie, what other thoughts do you have?
I think he pretty much hit upon everything I was wanting to know about and how it connects. Because
Absolutely.
it's a very much a Poe-esque show that was in the 70s and 60s. So
Absolutely. I would love to go back in my own parallel time and be like a teenager watching that. I know I would have just loved it every day. I would have kind of like you with the having to wait till from a Friday to a Monday. Like I would have been on my, tiptoes, just like waiting.
Oh, yes. For many years, I had a bumper sticker on my car that said, I ran home from school to watch Dark Shadows.
Oh,
And
that's
that's
awesome.
and that's true of my generation because the
Mhm.
show would be starting about the time school was out, and we would run home so we wouldn't miss it. And Catherine Lee
Absolutely.
Scott, who plays Maggie and Josette on the show,
Yes.
says that over and over, fans have said to her, "Oh, I ran home from school to watch you."
Hmm. That is so awesome. Well, the last question I have for you is, I mean, you said that Annabelle Lee is one of your favorite poems. What is like, do you have another favorite Poe story that's like your all-time favorite?
Well, I would. I like the assignation very much. That's
That's a good one.
an unusual, out of the way story. But
Hmm.
I would have to say that probably my favorite poem is Annabelle Lee, and my favorite story is The Telltale Heart,
Hmm.
because as I told my students, it at the time it was written, it was the scariest story ever written, and in many ways still is today. But back then, people were shocked that something was written like that with so much raw emotion and violence and insanity. and it's very, very scary and still holds up today. And without Poe and that story, there would not be H.P. Lovecraft or Robert Bloch or Richard Matheson or Anne Rice or any of the writers who came after Poe.
Absolutely.
Poe did.
Oh, I agree. I totally agree.
Yeah, Poe did so much more than just horror. You know, he wrote satire. He wrote funny stories like that Mummy story and others, and he wrote literary criticism and wrote detective stories. He, sort of invented that detective mystery genre with his detective that predates Sherlock Holmes, and even with a manuscript found in a bottle. That makes me think of what Edgar Rice Burroughs would later write, Pellucidar and the Center of the Earth and all of that. So
absolutely.
So he was multi-talented and diverse, because everything he wrote was different, but everything he wrote almost influenced other writers who came after him, and perpetuated genres or styles that he created with his horror and revenge and weird romance stories and funny stories and things like that.
Absolutely. Totally agree 100%. And with you really liking The Telltale Heart, some of our friends, they're Poe movies. They they're on Facebook and Twitter, but also YouTube. And on their YouTube channel, they do movie shorts of Poe's works. And one of them is The Telltale Heart. That's one of their most recent ones that they've done. And the narrator, they decided to make it a woman as a caregiver. And so check it out. I think it's about 18 or 19 minutes long. One of our previous Poe Unplugs, we had them on and let them talk about the making of it, their inspiration behind like why they chose the lady as the narrator. And it's fantastic. I highly suggest it. So check that out.
Okay, great. Well, thank you.
All right. Well, Jeannie, anything else?
Nope, I think I've hit upon everything I wanted to know.
I think me as well. And Jeff, it has been amazing talking to you today and having you on Poe Unplugged. And these episodes will be coming out very soon. We have to go to the editing aspect next.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to come on and talk to you. I really appreciate it.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm anxious to get your 2 other books, and also we'll definitely have to have you on again when we do another, Poe Unplugged or, something of that nature to add to it. So yeah, we really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
All
I
right.
really appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Hey.
And we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye. And the shadow answered, I am shadow, in dim plains of Helusion which border upon the foul Turonian canal. And then did we, the 7, start from our seats in horror, and stand trembling and shuddering and aghast, for the tones in the voice of the shadow were not the tones of any one being, but of a multitude of beings, and varying in their cadences from syllable to syllable, fell duskly upon our ears in the well-remembered and familiar accents of many thousand departed friends.